People, let's be sensible about it. They were afraid. You'd have been afraid too. But when Jesus gets in the boat, the winds and the waves cease, and the ship goes where it's supposed to be. Never lose sight of that. Yep, we're going to face the winds. We're going to face the waves. But notice in Hebrews 13, look at verse number 5. Let your conversation be without covetousness. Let your manner of life be where you're not dreaming about everything you want that you'll never have. Your God, I just want to be rich. It ain't going to happen. He can't trust what he's given you already. Well, if I'd had more, I'd do better. No, you wouldn't. No. Notice what he said. And be content with such things as you have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. I'm not going to leave you. The storms of life may get rough. The ship may get tossed to and fro. We have no idea what we may be facing in the morning. But I will never leave thee. The great I Am will be with you every step of the way. When the seas are at their worst, he walks on them. I'm getting ahead of myself. I ain't going to have time to get there anyway. Can you imagine those 3 Hebrew children when they were thrown into the fire? Then all of a sudden somebody started walking with them. Oh yeah. Can you imagine as Jesus walked in the fire? And when they were told to come out, they climbed out of that fire without the scent of smoke anywhere on them. They only learned that in the fire. Daniel only learned that God can close the lion's mouth in the lion's den. They could only learn that God could part the Red Sea as they were facing the Red Sea with mountains on both sides and Egypt behind them. You only get to see that God is God when everything is disarray and destructive is imminent. How many of y'all have ever watched a movie? And you know the star of the movie is there. And you know they can't kill him because they're already making a second one. And the bomb is fixing to go off. And they try to defuse the bomb. What's the time on the clock? Do what?
1 second before moving.
Less than 3 seconds at all times. Most times they cut the wire on 3 and it counts 2 more and stops on 1. Why? You know he's not going to die. They already made a second movie. You know he's going to live. But it makes you start going, just cut the wire, cut the wire. It don't matter if it's the wrong one, just cut it. People, God always comes in with 1 second left. He didn't come to the boat till they were already in the storm. He didn't walk with the 3 Hebrew children till they were already in the fire. He didn't close the mouth of the lions for Daniel till he was thrown in the lion's den. God shows up at the last moment. So you will realize he is God. Never lose sight of that. God's God. He's the great I Am. He's in control. He reminds us, cast your cares upon him, for he careth for you. People, when we're in the midst of the ship, we're his responsibility. We can trust him. Go to Exodus chapter 10, and we're going to stop on this one tonight. Exodus chapter 10. I'll give you 2 verses, one in chapter 10 and one in chapter 14. The lessons we need to learn. The great I Am is in our life. And he's so effective in what he does. Notice in verse number 2 in Exodus 10. and that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son and of thy son's son what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that they may know how that I am the Lord. Now, the setting. How many of y'all believe when Moses went into Egypt, it was plague after plague after plague after plague, and they walked out? That's the way it reads when you read it. It didn't happen that way. There was a plague, and then God gave Pharaoh a chance to do things. And then weeks later, there would be another plague. And then weeks or months later, there'd be another plague. This went on for months. This was not a 10-day cycle of plagues and they walked out the 11th day. These 10 plagues went over time. It went through the complete harvest. It even comes up the beginning of the next year. That's when the Passover was instated. So it could have been 6 or 8 months. We don't know exactly how long, or I don't, that this went on. And during that time, and I asked this when I read this text the way that it said. Notice in verse 1, and the Lord said unto Moses, go in unto Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart. Pharaoh started hardening it, and guess what? God finished it. He said, in the heart of his servants, that I might shew these my signs before him. It's coming fast to the end. We have the plague of locusts and darkness coming. Hell is already over with, the plague of hell, and we're going to go into the death of the firstborn. So, it's fixing to pick up rapidly from now on. But during that, the way verse number 2 reads, and that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son and thy son's son, what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that they may know? No, ye may know. I sort of picture Moses as, you know what, God, this has gone on long enough. Pharaoh's not getting it. He's not getting it. I sort of picture Moses being about like us. God, I've talked to them, they're not getting it. They're not. Just get them over with and let's plant them and go to something else. They're not getting it. And I don't mean that in a harsh way. I meant, hey, you know what? If I'd have been doing this for months on time and Pharaoh wasn't getting any closer to reaching our agreement that God had given me, I'd be in the same boat Moses is in. God, he's dumb. He ain't getting it. I done talked to him and talked to him and talked to him and showed him and showed him and showed him. He's not listening. And God leans over heaven and said, Moses, I got a few more things I want to do. You just keep doing what I told you to do. It'll be all right. How many times have we prayed for people and they never come to church and we quit praying for them and that's when they come to church? That's what he's talking about. That ye may know. Moses, that you may know what I've done. That I may reassure you that I am in control of this. You got to remember, one thing you got to understand, the first couple of plagues was as much a plague to Israel as it was to Egypt. It was. So then all of a sudden God begins just to pour it on Egypt. And that's the setting that we see here. And the lesson that you and I can glean from is very simply this. People, we serve God that we may know. It doesn't matter if anybody else listens, anybody else pays attention. It doesn't matter. It's what we're doing, that we may know God is God. Notice in Exodus chapter 14, as they're beginning to leave and get in lots of trouble leaving, trust me, they are coming after Israel hot and fast. And notice verse 4. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he will follow after them and I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. For this is over with, Pharaoh doesn't get it. His leaders doesn't get it. Egypt as a people finally figures it out. There's only one God. He's in heaven. He's the great I am. And he's in control from beginning to end. You can speak of what all we like to do, what all we wished would be done. But Moses learned it's what God wants to be done, and that's all that needs to be done. That Egypt may know that I am the Lord. We serve God not just for us, we serve God for others. That they may know there's a God in heaven. When adversity flies and destructive forces is all around, when they look at us, will they see us stable, cemented, a concrete pillar that God can use? Or do they see us as the raging of the sea when the storms come? Now, people, I want to tell you something. To stand here and tell you that when storms come, you won't have fear would be a very foolish thing. Why? Because I've never been in a true storm that I liked it. Okay? You know, if I was on the Gulf Coast and they told me a hurricane's coming, you know what I would do? I'd sensibly get my vehicle and leave. I'm not afraid of the storm, per se, but the aftermath can be rough. But I learned something when Katrina came through. That day after Katrina comes on and we go in Monday, and you could tell the people walking that lost everything. And there was a man, his wife, and a couple of kids. And they were acting like they didn't have a care in the world. I said, "Sir, were you able to get anything out?" He goes, "Oh man, everything." He said, "My wife's mother lives with us. And when that storm went across Florida, she said, you go tomorrow and get a U-Haul truck. We're packing. This one's fixing to hit New Orleans dead in the mouth." So as of Monday that week, she started packing. And at night, we started packing. He said, Saturday morning, we get up, or Friday night gets off work. He said, we get everything in, we leave. He said, I'm sitting up here come Saturday. He said, everything I own's in that U-Haul right out there. He said, it was a rented house. We lost nothing. He said, I've been with my mother-in-law long enough that when she said, this one's the big one, it's going to hit us dead in the mouth, I got a U-Haul immediately. I'd hope I would be that smart, that when I see danger come, I would leave. One of the worst hurricanes of all time was in Texas. Galveston. The doctor that actually came in, and back in the late 1800s, they didn't have the instruments we have today. He looked at the pressure and what it was doing in the atmosphere and the water level, and came and told everybody this will be the worst hurricane he's ever seen. He was one of the first victims because he got everybody else out of town and he stayed. Storms are coming. We can prepare for them and let Jesus carry us through with them and prove he's the great I am, or we can fall in defeat under the weight of the storm that's coming. But he's still the great I am, regardless what happens in our life. If we don't trust him, that's not his fault, that's ours. If we fail him, that's not his fault, it's ours. But if we trust him, we can be victorious. Because of the great I am said, I am that I am hath sent thee.